Let's start with the less crazy and slowly work our way up towards the insane ones. Heaven's Gate. Heaven's Gate was founded in the 1970s by Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles. These two believed they were the two witnesses mentioned in the Book of Revelation. As you can see already, we're off to a wild start, with two weirdos thinking they were the ones mentioned in the Bible. Their gimmick was behind a mind-bending mix of Christianity and UFO lore. They taught that the Earth was about to be recycled or wiped clean, and the only way to survive was to leave your human vehicle, body, and ascend to a higher physical level of existence. But here's where it gets really bizarre. They believed this ascension would happen via a spaceship that was trailing the Hale-Bopp comet. Yeah, you heard that right. A spaceship hiding behind a comet. The group lived in a highly controlled environment. Members had to follow strict rules, including maintaining a genderless appearance. They wore identical uniforms, and many of the men were literally castrated. But the truly magic part came in March 1997. As the Hale-Bopp comet approached Earth, Applewhite convinced 38 followers that it was time to shed their earthly bodies and board the spaceship. They committed mass suicide in a rented mansion in San Diego, all wearing identical black shirts and Nike sneakers, with purple shrouds over their faces. The weirdest part is that they seemed calm and rational in the farewell videos they left behind. They genuinely believed they were moving on to a better existence. The Heaven's Gate website, maintained by two former members who didn't participate in the mass suicide, is still up today. It's like a time capsule from the 90s, frozen at the moment when the group believed they were about to transcend human existence. 2. Movement for the Restoration of the Ten Commandments of God. So imagine it's Uganda in the 1980s, and this group pops up saying, "Hey everyone, we need to get back to the basics and really focus on those 10 commandments." Sounds pretty straightforward. But wait, there's more. These people believed the world was going to end with the century at 1999. They had this whole thing about the Virgin Mary appearing to their leaders and spilling the beans on the apocalypse. Now here's where it gets really weird. They were really into silence. Like, to an extreme degree, they believed talking led to sin, so they communicated mostly through sign language and written notes. Their lifestyle was pretty intense too. No sex, no soap. Yeah, you read that right. And they fasted a lot. So what do you do when your big doomsday prediction doesn't pan out? Spoiler alert, it didn't. Well, apparently you reschedule. They set a new date, March 17th, 2000. But this is where things go from odd to horrifying. On that day, hundreds of members gathered in a church. The building was sealed. And then, it was set on fire. We're talking about around 530 people dying in this inferno. And as if that wasn't bad enough, investigators later found hundreds more bodies at other sites linked to the group. It's still not clear if this was a mass suicide or if the leaders murdered their followers. Some think the leaders realized their predictions were bogus and decided to, well, cover their tracks in the most horrific way possible. Then that Order of the Solar Temple, picture this. It's the 1980s, and these two guys, Joseph DiMambro and Luc Jouret, decide to start a group that's basically a mashup of New Age stuff, Christianity, and some seriously out there ideas about the Knights Templar. They're telling people, hey, we've got this secret Templar knowledge, and we're preparing for the end of the world. They're also going on about a spiritual elite, and how they can all travel to a planet called Sirius after they die. Now, you'd think that this would attract, I don't know, maybe some hippies or conspiracy theorists, but apparently we're talking doctors, lawyers, and even successful business people. But in 1994, they start doing these mass murder suicides. We're talking 74 people in total, across Switzerland, Canada, and France. They had arranged themselves in these creepy star formations in secret rooms. The leaders had convinced them that dying was just like catching a bus to an enlightened plane of existence. As for the leaders themselves, Joseph DiMambro and Luc Jouret, they were among those who died in the first wave of suicides in 1994. Convenient timing, right? After all this, the group pretty much disintegrated. I mean, when your leaders and a big chunk of your membership are gone, it's kind of hard to keep things going. Plus, you can imagine the police and authorities were all over this by that point. But there were rumors for years that there might still be members out there lying low, so you never know. It's a garbage eaters. So picture this. It's the 1970s, hippie culture is fading, and along comes this guy, Jim Roberts. He's ex-military, turned religious crazy head, and he's got some pretty crazy ideas. Roberts starts gathering followers, mostly young people, with this pitch of ultimate biblical living. We're talking no possessions, no jobs, no fixed address, just wandering the country like modern-day hobos. And the garbage eaters nickname? That wasn't just for show. These people were literally diving into dumpsters for their next meal, really taking the one man's trash is another man's treasure to the extreme. The Brethren weren't just playing at being biblical hobos, they took this lifestyle seriously. Members would cut off all contact with their families, making sure no one knew what they were doing. And their recruitment tactics? They had a real knack for finding college students. You know the type. Young, questioning everything, looking for meaning. The Brethren would swoop in with their message of rejecting materialistic society and boom, new recruit. Now they had some pretty intense practices. Fasting was a big thing, not just for spiritual reasons, but as a form of punishment. And if you were a married couple in the group, well, don't get too comfortable because they might separate you at any time as a way to keep you focused on God rather than each other. Though despite all this, the Brethren never really went down the path of violence like some other cults. They were more about extreme homelessness than killing people. They're still around today, believe it or not, though in much smaller numbers. It's like they're this living relic of a time when rejecting society could mean literally eating out of garbage cans. Aum Shinrikyo. So imagine it's Japan in the 1980s economic boom. Into this scene steps Shoko Asahara, a partially blind former yoga instructor with some, let's say, unique ideas. Asahara starts this group that's this weird mix of Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, and apocalyptic prophecies. He's telling people he can levitate, read minds, all that. And people are buying it. At its peak, Aum had tens of thousands of members in Japan and Russia. But soon things take a dark turn when they start stockpiling weapons and experimenting with chemical weapons. We're talking sarin gas, VX, even trying to develop biological weapons like anthrax. These weapons are incredibly dangerous because they're designed to kill or hurt large numbers of people indiscriminately and cause extreme suffering. They're so deadly and uncontrollable that they're banned worldwide. And then, in 1995, they actually used this stuff. They released sarin gas in the Tokyo subway, killed 13 people, injured thousands more. It was the worst terror attack in Japan's history. People just going about their daily commute, and suddenly they're caught in a chemical weapon attack. The crazy thing is, this wasn't even their first attack. They'd been testing their weapons on unsuspecting people for years. There was this small town, Matsumoto, where they released sarin a year earlier, killing 8 people. After the Tokyo attack, the hammer came down hard. Mass arrests, the group was banned, Asahara was executed in 2018, along with 12 other leaders. But apparently, even after all that, a splinter group still exists today under a different name. The Anthill Kids. It's the 1970s in Quebec, Canada. This guy, Roche Thériault, who's already got a history of religious obsession, starts gathering followers. He's charismatic, talks about the end times, and calls himself Moses. Classic cult leader stuff. But here's where it gets really messed up. Thériault moves his group to the wilderness, first to Ontario, and then to a remote area in Quebec. They're living off the grid, calling themselves the Anthill Kids, because they're supposedly as industrious as ants. Now, Thériault's not content with just being a spiritual leader. He gets this idea that he's a healer too. This guy starts performing surgeries without any medical training whatsoever. We're talking pulling teeth without anesthesia, amputating limbs, even drilling holes in people's skulls. One of the most horrific incidents, and trust us, it's hard to pick just one, was when he cut open a woman's abdomen with a kitchen knife in a so-called surgery. When she started bleeding out, his solution was to try to cauterize the wound with a hairdryer. Unsurprisingly, she died from this. But it wasn't just the adults suffering. Thériault fathered over 20 children in the commune, and these kids weren't spared from the abuse. There are reports of him breaking their legs, burning them, and even making them sit on hot stoves as punishment. He was also big on cleansing rituals. One involved hanging people upside down from the ceiling and leaving them there for days. Another had followers drinking a mixture of motor oil and water. The cult operated for years before it was finally busted in 1989. A social worker got suspicious when she saw some of the commune's children in town, noticed they seemed off, and alerted authorities. When the police raided the place, they found a house of horrors. Thériault ended up getting life in prison, where he was killed by another inmate in 2011.